Okay, so Ben Sellers, really nice to talk to you again.
Nice to see you too.
The first thing I wanted you to do is really tell us something about your background, because I think a lot of people really won't know the work you have been doing and why we're interviewing you now, why we think it's important for people to know something about you.
Many years ago, I worked for the TUC, and I worked on a particular project with migrant workers, and which then sort of led into some work with asylum seekers. And that's really where I first kind of learned about using social media. We used social media, Facebook in particular, to allow people to remain anonymous, basically, which was really useful to them. And it meant that they could say what they want, and they could express themselves under anonymous names. And then over the years, I kind of used it a little bit with Red Labour. So we probably don't have time to go into all the history of Red Labour, but basically it was a bit of an offshoot from the LRC with people who really felt that potential of using social media and having kind of quite direct communications with people beyond political circles sometimes was a really useful tool that we had. And Red Labour became instrumental really in then when Jeremy declared for the leadership campaign, because Red Labour was able to organise a kind of grassroots, with this kind of network that we developed, a grassroots campaign to put pressure on MPs, firstly to nominate, but then obviously to bring people into the party, to organise. But it did definitely give us an incredible tool to start organising that campaign. And then when, after a few days of thinking about who was going to be organising the social media campaign, John McDonnell gave me a ring and said, would you like to lead it?
But when it really came into focus for me was during that time of Momentum, and when Momentum was being built. What was your involvement in the building of Momentum?
Well, it's a bit unusual compared to a lot of the other people, because I didn't actually spend all that much time in London. I didn't do much of the kind of practical organising of phone banks and things like that. My job was really just to organise the social media, but it gave me an insight into people outside of the centre. So, outside of London, outside of Westminster, outside of the kind of core group that was coalescing around the leadership campaign. So I felt like I always had quite a good overview of where the support and the different strands of support were coming from. I was an organizer, basically. So I organized the network of social media people. So there was a core group. Quite a lot of those people were from the LRC, people who I knew through Red Labour, but also some other people that had been kind of suggested by Jeremy's office team and so on. We brought them in, and it was really quite a good, vibrant sort of organising steering group, I suppose.
Well,
but I was,
yeah. Actually, what you're missing out here was it was really innovative, and it was highly successful, wasn't it? I mean, I remember seeing those first bits of social media sort of canvassing and awareness raising for Jeremy and for Momentum kind of coming out. And they were very different to what we'd seen before, weren't they?
When it came to the social media campaign, we were really concerned that we had two-way communication going on all the time between the different segments that were supporting Jeremy. So, Palestinian Solidarity or DPAC or, Kittens for Corbyn, whatever it was, that they had a direct line into us. So they would, if they saw something they didn't like or thought that was going down the wrong road or potentially going to store up problems in the future, they were communicating with us straight away. And we had this open access to us as a team, and it's not easy to keep that going, because I did have these weekly meetings in London, and we would be quite encouraged sometimes to be more cautious and be kind of less grassroots and more, come on, we need to tighten things up a bit. And me and a couple of other people would say, no, this isn't the way that we've got here, so we won't do that, actually. And then we would have to make our case and so on. And this is where the kind of seeds of the arguments within Momentum come
Exactly.
in. At the end of that leadership campaign, which was incredibly successful, and the social media, everyone recognised that the social media had played an important part in that. And at the end of it, we had this network, and it was pretty big, certainly compared to what we'd ever seen before. And it was a lot of it was about organising online and people who you'd never met, but you kind of built a little bit of trust with, which was really important. And at the end of that, I had a call from John Landsman, literally I think it was on the evening after the result had been announced. And he said, look, I think we should close down all these groups, all these social media groups. And I said, well, I think that isn't the plan, and they are an incredible resource for us. And really, my idea is that and has always been, I mean, we talked about this throughout the campaign, that those would be the foundation stones for the building of a new organisation, which we didn't know the name of then, obviously. And this became a bit of an argument. I was about to go for like a celebratory drink and a meal, and I didn't want to deal with this. But John McDonnell, I phoned John McDonnell and said, look, this is out of order. This can't happen, and I won't let it happen. I mean, we are carrying on with these groups. They're really important. And John had a word with John Landsman. John McDonnell had a word with John Landsman, and he did back down. And we then evolved those Jeremy for Labour leader local groups and regional groups and so on into a structure that was kind of like a holding thing for Momentum. But also, I think more importantly, develop this grassroots network and become a vibrant left within the Labour Party, but also facing outwards. And there was a bit of confusion around it. I think there was at one point there was a People's Momentum created, and then a kind of Labour Momentum created. And I don't think we ever really got to the bottom of how that would work, how the two things would work, the internally faced kind of faction organisation and the outward facing organisation. I was kind of more interested in that in some ways, because I thought that the battle in the Labour Party would happen anyway. And we might want to use a different organisation for that. But I was kind of more interested in a organisation that was campaigning in local communities. So there was this debate really within the early formation of Momentum about what it should be, and this and I think there were two needs really. There was a need to win the battle within the party, because there was no way that the right wing, either the membership or the bureaucracy of the right wing, were ever going to sort of sit back and let us take control over CLPs, or we knew that they were going to be chasing us out of the party as soon as they possibly could, So there was a need for that. But I was always more interested in the idea of Momentum being a organisation that cast its net much wider. So that was looking at community campaigning. That was, I mean, I remember talking to Seb Corbyn and John McDonnell and saying, look, we need a group that brings people into not necessarily the Labour Party, but an understanding of the connections that there were between the Labour left, the trade union movement, and the wider kind of social movements, and to try and kind of cohere that. And I think that was kind of an idea. Obviously, what happened was very quickly was that a few people, and John Landsman being kind of the central figure here, did not like some of that idea, because it sounded chaotic, and it sounded like you know, people were going to be joining that we didn't like, or we didn't trust, or we didn't know their backgrounds, and could they all get us expelled, you know? And there was a lot of nervousness amongst the socialist campaign group of MPs about what all this would mean, you know, this kind of chaotic organization. I mean, some of us thought of it not as being chaos, but as being, you know, vibrant and exciting and expansive. You know.
And grassroots. In fact, I had a conversation with John Landsman when I was trying to explain to him, very similar to what you're saying now, how we had organized in Thanet and how important it was to do that, to actually build a mass movement, and why it was important to build a mass movement to protect the whole Corbyn project. And he was totally nonplussed. He said, but you know, he basically said, well, I don't understand. What is a grassroots movement? And I think there was a real sort of, if you like, clash of cultures. You had somebody like Landsman who was very used to dealing with Labour bureaucracy, where there was somebody at the top, and then there were all these, you know, this kind of pyramidical figures all the way down, and the people at the top would tell the people at the bottom exactly how to do it. And he could not. It's not that he didn't want to break out of that, because I'm going to be totally frank here, I think he had a real sense of wanting to keep hold of this power. And he had a real sense of where he wanted it to go. And it was to be kept as his power base. Momentum was going to be John Landsman's power base, you know, for good or bad. Now, how did you actually deal with that kind of clash?
We had kind of this debate around the future of Momentum early on, and I think we kind of lost it in a way, because on one level anyway, because what John did was he went to the socialist campaign group of MPs, Labour MPs, and he asked for their support to close this down, to close down any notion of being people being able to join that weren't Labour Party members, for instance, or for the philosophy behind it to be much more expansive and grassroots. And quite a lot of the Labour MPs were nervous about it, and they were nervous about their positions. They were nervous about expulsions. They were nervous about all of the things. You know, it was purely framed in in a negative sense about what could happen to us if we allowed Momentum to run away with itself. And so John, I remember this kind of like sort of quite dramatic point where we had a meeting with some of those MPs, and we basically got outvoted. So it was framed as a Labour Party membership organisation. There was all sorts of kind of rules around it, and from a very early stage, really, John Landsman wanted to have it as his organisation that he had control over, and really it was an attempt to shut down that, to do what John had said he wanted to do at the end of the campaign. So he was going to scrap the whole thing and start again, or at least he threatened to do that. So that was the kind of situation we were faced with.
Ben, I think these are precious insights, and I hope that you either have or will at some point write them up. But I think it's important that we locate the issues of individuals, but also Momentum, in a much broader contradiction, which was the conflict, I think, between the fact that the Parliamentary Labour Party was one of the most reactionary forces in British society. And if there was ever going to be progress for the left, there had to be a mass movement from below to try to control and change the Parliamentary Labour Party. The only way the left could ever have won was this mass movement from below, challenging the power of the PLP within the party and bringing the party outwards as part of a broader movement. And yet the PLP would never, ever have allowed that. So that's, I think, the broader contradiction.
Yeah, I felt that contradiction that you're talking about completely and utterly, and I think that it was very worrying to see, people like Tom Watson pulling strings, even Andy Burnham making demands about which of his friends were going to, be in the shadow cabinet and potentially withdrawing support. You have just a whole range of people that we knew we couldn't trust being brought in. And I suppose this is the key thing. Momentum should have been at the forefront of that conversation. It should have been representing us as grassroots, activists in this project. I don't think we resolved that, basically, and I think that became like a sort of poison within Momentum, where lots of people at the top of it then came to see their interests as defending the parliamentary party or making links, and so some of these people who had done such damage to the socialist left in the party were kind of welcomed with open arms, because people became immune to it, basically, and forgotten what we were trying to do.
I'm really interested about this no platforming and banning and censorship, etc., which, we all know, it is kind of unprecedented. We've never had an atmosphere like this politically or creatively and artistically before. Yeah,
I mean, I like to sort of think of it in terms of a political culture that has developed, I suppose. And I think what has happened is that a lot of that has to do with the way people interact online, particularly on social media. And I think there has become a kind of intolerance of debate, I suppose. So if you think about the way that the anti-Semitism smear allegations, whatever you want to call it, has happened, it's a campaign. It was an absolute campaign against the socialist left in the Labour Party, but probably beyond that as well, Palestinian activists and so on. It was incredibly successful. And what the success of it was really about not having the debate, getting into an argument. So there's very little debate about how we might tackle anti-Semitism. I would like to see more people challenge it, but actually very few people do. And I think the people that do are the people that are being called cranks and the left, who have been fairly consistent in their understanding of the need for debate and so on, but actually, a large part of the mainstream of the Labour left, let's say, have not challenged this, and it's probably for a number of reasons. One is because they actually agree with the idea of that method of shutting people down and cancelling them and no platforming, and think that is a legitimate way to run your politics. Or they are too scared to say anything because they're worried that they will get targeted. But there is definitely a generational thing that's happening, which is that a lot of people who maybe learnt their politics via social media are quite uncomfortable with the idea of open debate, of discussing opposing views, of challenging them forcefully, and actually keeping some sort of comradeliness about that. And we don't want a political culture where everybody agrees, and but the main fundamental thing is that we need to have spaces for debate and for people to be able to say what they think honestly and openly.
And I think we need to have space where people can risk getting things wrong. Yeah. This issue that always got to be right all of the time is not just nonsense. To my mind, it's totally counterproductive in terms of what politics should be or what socialism should be. Okay, Ben, I'm now going to ask you what I think is really a critical question. What happened with the witch hunt?
I mean, it's quite complex when you think back about it, really, because you remember that in 2015, during the campaign, there was actually very little mention of anti-Semitism, and we kind of led that campaign on the basis that our main fight was really against the right wing of the Labour Party in terms of their sabotaging. We would call it like the purge now, wouldn't we? Where they tried to keep members out. They thought really that because they'd been in control of the Labour Party, in control of the bureaucracy for so long, that they could really make up the rules as they went along. And actually, it proved to be a lot harder than they thought. They did exclude a lot of people. They did keep a lot of people from voting, but in the end, in September, you know, Jeremy was voted in with a huge majority, and I think that the right, along with one or two unfortunate allies on the left, were basically then started hatching a plan to kind of destroy the integrity of the Corbyn project, if you want to call it that, by the use of the anti-Semitism. You know, it was against a particular section of the left, and it was a section of the left that was ironically anti-racist, ironically pro-Palestinian, ironically the most democratic part of the left, I think, and the most grassroots. So what's so disgraceful about it is that it has been used as a factional tool. And I'm not just talking about the Labour right, unfortunately. I'm talking about elements of the Labour left. So, you know, we have Momentum and John Lansman using it to beat off the challenge of a more democratic and a more decentralized and more grassroots left.
Why do you think some groups on the left thought that that was a good idea to do that?
So there were people who were absolutely scared, you know, witless about the idea of this accusation that Jeremy was an anti-Semite, and didn't know how to handle it. So, and I think there's reasons for that are quite, I think, fairly obvious. One is that not very many of those people had played an active role in the anti-racist movement over the years. But there were other people, that, you know, and a handful of us really, that were watching this with kind of horror, really, because we could see that that kind of rabbit caught in the headlights approach was just so damaging to Jeremy in particular, but also to other people, other MPs, other people around him as well. I would have said to him, look, Jeremy, you have nothing to apologize about your record. What you need to do is to state that record again and again and again until people understand that you have been one of the foremost anti-racists in Parliament. It physically makes me still feel sick when I think about everything that's happened to people, you know, their mental health being challenged, them being physically attacked, you know, thousands of people being, and you know, not just socialists from, you know, the old LRC, or you know, trade unionists who came into this with enthusiasm and, you know, excitement about what they were going to try and change, and they've been beaten down and they've been bullied and they've been harassed, and that has happened with the kind of tacit consent of another group within the left who essentially decided that this was an opportunity for them. And I think that is as important an issue to discuss and to learn the lessons from as thinking about what the Labour right did to us, because we can all get angry about the Labour right, but unfortunately we have no control over them, and we don't expect them to be responsible to the left movement, and they don't to the socialists. We don't expect them to have respect, but we should expect that from our fellow socialists, if that's what they're calling themselves. And I think what's missing in the whole of this debate, which I think is and the whole of the kind of the constriction of the space to speak, is education. Actually, and education primarily happens through debate and through discussions and through people being able to make mistakes and and all of that. But instead of that, what happened is that it just became a game, and I find that so offensive, bullying, harassment, online pylons and things like that. What damage has that done to our internal left culture? I'm seeing a lack of interest in listening to people, in debating, and no interest in discussing difficult issues and so on. But I think that one of the big lessons that we need to learn from the weaponization of anti-Semitism is around that, and we need to reject that kind of culture.
Jeremy gets defeated. He is removed as leader, and we have the Starmer counter-revolution. And we're in a different period now. But the first question is, what do you think are the main lessons of that period which ended up in defeat, the lessons of the Corbyn years?
Basically, there was a fear and a concern about how grassroots organising would get out of control, and it meant that the kind of traditional power players within the Labour left, and there was just a few, I think, but they would lose control over it. And I think that one of the big lessons we need to learn is that will always end up in a failed and a conservative political project.
Okay, where are we now after all these defeats? You've got the Starmer counter-revolution, socialists expelled and leaving the party. Why did you leave the Labour Party?
I mean, part of it is personal. Part of it is that I'd been doing this for a long time, and and I kind of felt like I needed a break from it. And I think everybody needs to think about the amount of energy that they put into things where they're, particularly ones where they're hitting their head against a brick wall. I really think that it is a witch hunt, and I think that it is a harassment of people. I think there's such a nasty culture, and I didn't want to stay and not fight, so I would have had to give in so much energy to that fight, and I wanted the freedom to do other things. But fundamentally, I think it's that thing about the party being lawless. There is no rules. There's no pretense at democracy within the Labour Party now. And therefore, it's very hard to see how, A, you could rebuild the Labour left within it, and B, how you could even protect the Labour left. But I think eventually we might well end up with, a kind of left party on the lines of the way, the left parties that we see, the countries around Europe and so on. And who is to say that a social democratic or right-wing social democratic party is needed in this country? Because that's what they are creating, and actually quite an authoritarian one as well. And I don't know whether that is what they're going for, and I don't know whether there is a gap, in the market for that.
Well, Ben, actually, I agree with a lot of what you've said. Probably our main difference may be on the timing, but these are monumental times, and I hope that Red Lion will continue to discuss this as together with the rest of the left. So watch this space, I think.
Thank you so much, Ben, for being with us. Yeah, I'll be following you on Twitter.
Cheers.